Two things kept Wes sane: his responsibility for Annette and Jennifer Simpson, and his fear for his own life. Wes momentarily turned on the car's interior light to look at his watch and saw through bleary eyes that it was 2 a.m. About 50 miles down the road, Wes started looking for a motel with a vacancy sign. He passed a Motel 6 and a Days Inn before spotting the blinking neon light of the Travel-Weary Lodge. Wes pulled into the motel driveway, parked, and walked to the door. The vacancy sign was on, but no night clerk was on duty. Wes pounded on the front door several times. Finally, an elderly man in a bright orange and red bathrobe appeared and let Wes in. "Hi there, how many people?" "3. We need 2 beds. 3 adults?" "2 adults, 1 child." "That'll be $37.50 in advance." A car horn outside the motel room abruptly wakened Wes at 6:50 a.m. after a couple of hours' sleep. Quietly, Wes opened the door and stepped outside into the crisp autumn air. Annette joined him. Wes sat down on the edge of the curb. "We really don't have much choice," he said. "We have to find a place where no one knows us. It's not safe for us back in Columbus County." "But what about your radio show?" Wes motioned toward the motel office. "There's a payphone down there. I'll call my producer. You get Jennifer ready and we'll hit the road." Wes walked to the office and dialed Chuck Bailey. "Might as well tell him some of the story," he thought. "Chuck will think I'm crazy, but nothing I tell him will make sense." "Chuck, it's Wes. I can't make it in tomorrow." "Are you sick?" "Sort of. Fact is, I don't know when I'll do the show again." "What's that mean? Are you quitting?" "Maybe. I'm not sure. But I can't come near Clarion." "What have you done? Got some debts you can't pay off? Did you get into a fight with someone?" "No, it involves that girl. She's the victim of a dangerous cult involving the most powerful people in the county." "Wes, are you drinking again?" "Chuck, I'm completely sober. Don't believe me if you don't want to, but try to buy me some time with Warren. Tell him a friend is dying and I can't leave him. That's half true." "I can't guarantee the boss won't fire you," Chuck warned. "I'll try to stall a couple of days. After that, I don't know." 2 hours later, they approached the outskirts of Chicago. It was a strange homecoming for Annette and Jennifer. Getting lost in the big city of Chicago could work only if they stayed away from Annette's house. Before Wes could express his concerns, Annette spoke. "If we're going into hiding, we should stay on this side of town. Do you have any idea what to do next?" Wes shrugged his shoulders. "We can't keep paying for motel rooms. I don't have that much money. We have to find an apartment and figure out what to do from there." For the next hour they sat in the car reviewing classified ads. It was clear that Wes's money wouldn't go far in Chicago. "This might be it," Annette said excitedly. 1 bedroom, 535 square feet, gas oven, mini fridge, 3rd floor, no elevator, $225 per month, 2519 Calhoun Street. Landlord on premises. Wes cocked his head cynically. "Doesn't sound like much to me," he said. "Beggars can't be choosers," Annette quipped. The small apartment building was about 30 feet wide, and 3 apartments were stacked on top of each other. Directly across the street, a bar welcomed patrons with a huge flashing neon sign that said, "Happy Landing." "Wait in the car," Wes said. "I'll see if anyone is home." Wes knocked several times before the only door to the building opened, and a robust woman in her 60s greeted him. "Sorry I didn't come right away," the woman said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "I was in the kitchen doing my breakfast dishes. Name's Hattie McKenzie. What can I do for you?" "I read your ad about an apartment for rent." 2 flights up. I live on the main level, and a gentleman who works at a local machine shop is just above me." "This apartment just for you?" Wes hesitated. He hadn't thought things through. For a split second, he saw himself behind the microphone of Talk About Town, answering a caller with a quick wit that made his show a success. "No, my wife and daughter, too." Wes hadn't expected much and wasn't disappointed. The door opened into a small kitchen which led to a tiny room that could serve as a living room. A bathroom and single bedroom were located down a short hallway. "It's furnished, you know," Hattie said, pointing to a dilapidated couch and a small wooden table and chairs that Wes surmised the Goodwill would reject. "You're welcome to use the pots and pans in the cupboard. If you're interested in the apartment, I need a month's rent in advance." "I'll take it," Wes said. "If you pay by check, I can't let you move in right now. Have to wait until the check clears. No, I've got cash. That's good. What'd you say your name was? Wes, he answered. Last name? Milton. Wesley Milton. Come on downstairs. We'll fill out the papers so you can get your things moved in. Annette roused Jennifer, and they climbed the rickety stairs to apartment number 3. Mrs. Mackenzie knocked on the door, her arms loaded with blankets and sheets. Thought you might need these. Saw you walk in without anything. I can't let you keep them, but if you need them for a night or two, it's okay. Thanks, Mrs. Mackenzie, Wes said. She probably wondered about their coming to Chicago with just the clothes on their backs, but she said goodbye cheerfully enough. I think it's safe to leave you two here, Wes said. I'll run next door to the Dairy Mart and pick up some coffee, juice, and cereal for the morning. Wes reached out to Annette. As he put his big arms around her small body, she curled into his chest and hugged him hard in return. How will you keep warm on the couch? Annette asked. I'll use our coats. That'll get me by tonight. Tomorrow I can buy some blankets. Don't worry. Good morning. How about some cereal? Wes said to Annette the next morning as he heard her footsteps on the bare wooden hall floor. I didn't know what you and Jennifer liked, so I got one of those variety packs. A little of everything. Some healthy stuff and some sugar-coated junk. Take your pick. I'll get Jennifer up, Annette responded. If you have some Rice Krispies, please pour her a bowl. She used to like them. Wes and Annette ate hurriedly while Jennifer only picked at her cereal, complaining of a stomach ache. Annette asked Jennifer to play in the bedroom so she and Wes could talk privately. Annette and Wes sat in the kitchen to plan their strategy. Before they did, Wes addressed an envelope to Larry Bender at the Columbus County Courier and wrote "Confidential" in large letters across the front. What are you doing? Annette asked. Larry Bender, the assistant editor of the Courier, helped me find you. He let me go through some old newspapers that led to where you were. I didn't mention any names, but said I'd mail him the full story about who's involved in the Order of the Dark Raven. If he doesn't hear from me in 30 days, he'll open the envelope. Just a precaution, in case something happens to us. Wes leaned forward, touched her arm, and asked gently, Did Gregory ever abuse Jennifer? Annette stared at her hands, her forehead furrowed in contemplation. If you'd asked me that question a year ago, I would have been shocked. But in the past few days I've been looking back, and a lot of things make sense. How could I have been so blind? Annette sat silently, eyes closed. Finally she spoke, haltingly, each word an attempt to expunge the self-assumed guilt and shame. Gregory was very aggressive sexually while we were dating. And he was like that until I got pregnant. I wouldn't say he was kinky exactly, but he liked some unusual variations. You know, different ways of doing it. Wes understood her apprehension. Hey, you don't have to tell me about your private life, he reminded her. It's okay. You might as well know, Annette assured him. Before Jennifer was born, Gregory had a strange obsession with my getting pregnant. It was more than a newly married husband wanting a child. I had to have a baby, and it had to be a girl. I was like a baby factory, a breeding machine. When Jennifer was born, Gregory was obsessive about raising her. He monitored what she ate, the toys she played with, even the people he allowed to touch her. An uncle of mine visited once, and Gregory wouldn't let him near Jennifer. I thought he was just a jealous father, but it was more like he owned her. Jennifer was a product of my body, but my pregnancy was incidental to Gregory. In fact, after he was born, he ignored me, Annette said, her voice trailing off as if she had hit a raw nerve deep in her psyche. Wes and Annette heard the sound of a door closing and turned to see Jennifer walking toward them, rubbing her eyes. Mommy, it's so cold in my room, and my tummy hurts. Annette put her arms out to the little girl in the cotton slip. Sit down. Mommy will make you a cup of hot chocolate. How's that? Jennifer smiled. Annette got up to boil water, and Wes carried on the conversation. In a few minutes, Annette set the hot chocolate in front of Jennifer, who slurped it loudly. Jennifer, Annette interrupted, remember your manners. Sip slowly, or wait until it cools down. For an instant, Jennifer stiffened like any child being disciplined. Then her expression relaxed. "I will, Mommy." Early Tuesday morning, Annette and Jennifer set out to buy a jacket and a nightgown for Jennifer and some essential household items. Wes waited anxiously in the apartment, flipping the dial to check out what talk radio offered Chicagoans. At noon, Wes heard voices outside, and then a knock at the door. He threw his arms around Annette and Jennifer like a relative who hadn't seen his loved ones in months. "Boy, am I glad to see you guys. You have no idea how worried I've been." Annette and Jennifer took off their coats and joined Wes at the kitchen table. Annette noticed that Jennifer was rubbing her stomach. "Is something wrong, honey?" "My tummy hurts." "Does it hurt like before?" "Yes, but it hurts worse today." "Jennifer, if you feel sick, tell Mommy. We're right near a hospital." "No," Jennifer panicked. "I don't want to see a doctor. They hurt people. The nasty people have doctors. They fix people when Dark Raven hurt them. Please, please don't make me see a doctor." Annette knelt by Jennifer and put her arms around her. "Real doctors don't hurt people on purpose, honey. They help people and make them better." Jennifer's defiance softened. Then she abruptly threw her arms around Annette's neck. "Okay, Mommy. I'll do it for you." Half an hour later, Wes, Annette, and Jennifer stood in front of the largest hospital in South Chicago. A tall statue of the Catholic patron St. Joseph loomed above the entrance. They stepped through the hospital's front door and walked up to a receptionist. "We'd like to see a doctor," Annette said. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but my daughter isn't feeling well, and I'm very worried about her." The receptionist shuffled some papers on her desk and picked up the intercom. She made 2 calls, then replied, "Dr. Olinger can see you in an hour. Go back out the front door and around to the emergency entrance at the rear. Ask for him by name." Wes thanked the woman, and the 3 of them started down the hall. Halfway down, Annette and Wes stopped and looked at each other. Annette grasped Wes's arm, pulled him toward her, and whispered, "What will we say when we get in there?" Like trauma centers at most big city hospitals, St. Joseph's emergency room bustled with activity. Every molded plastic chair in the cramped waiting room was filled. Many people seemed dazed from the pain of their wounds. Wes filled out the necessary papers using the name Heidi Hansen for Jennifer's real name. Doctors and nurses strode in and out of the waiting room, calling patients' names. They didn't lack compassion, but long hours of endless drama and human suffering had numbed them. "Heidi Hansen," a nurse called out as she walked into the waiting room. "Dr. Olinger will see you now." Jennifer didn't respond. Annette touched her leg and whispered, "Heidi, they're calling you." "Yes, ma'am," Wes said, jumping to his feet to compensate for Jennifer's lack of response. "Where should we go?" "Follow me down the hall. I'll put you in a room where you can wait for Dr. Olinger." The nurse directed them down a hallway to an austere examination room with light mauve plastered walls. Jennifer sat on the one chair in the room, while Wes stood to one side. Annette leaned against an examination table covered with fresh white paper. "I feel lots better, Mommy," Jennifer said. "I really don't need a doctor." Annette tilted her head and frowned, wordlessly letting Jennifer know enough talk had been bantered about. Wes wasn't sure how thin the barren walls were, but every sound they made reverberated around the room. He put his index finger to his lips, then said quietly, "Let's not talk. It's best to stay real quiet while we wait for the doctor." A short while later, a gray-haired man in a starched white coat entered the room. "Hi, I'm Dr. Ben. Who's Heidi?" Annette quickly pointed to her daughter, taking no chance that Jennifer would forget her assumed identity. "I want you to sit on this examination table, young lady. Come on, hop right up here." Jennifer grabbed both sides of the chair and hung on tightly. She turned her head, refusing to look at Dr. Olinger. "What's this, Heidi? You don't want me to examine you? I've got 3 grandchildren of my own, and I raised 2 little girls. This is only going to take a few minutes. The nurse told me you have a tummy ache. Maybe you had too many hot dogs and you just need some ice cream," he said, smiling. Jennifer peered at him suspiciously from wide eyes, then slowly stood up. Dr. Olinger took the opportunity to lift Jennifer onto the examination table. "How long's it been since Heidi's seen a doctor?" he asked, looking at Annette. "It's been a while," Annette answered, buying time. "I don't know. Maybe a year or more. Well, then I want to be more thorough. I'll only be 5-10 minutes. I wonder if the two of you could step out of the room a moment, he said to Wes and Annette. Even though it's just a tummy ache, I'd like to do a complete examination. We'll be right outside the door, Wes said. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Wes and Annette glanced at each other with increasing apprehension. Suddenly a shriek pierced the plaster walls, jolting Annette to attention. She recognized Jennifer's voice. I'm going in there, Wes. Inside, Jennifer wildly flailed her arms and legs, screaming, Don't touch me! Don't poke me! It hurts! Dr. Olinger was standing back from Jennifer, looking shocked and puzzled. Heidi, please calm down. I'm going to speak to your mother outside. He motioned Annette toward the door. Knowing Dr. Olinger wasn't going to touch her again, at least for the moment, Jennifer stopped screaming. Trembling, she drew her legs up until her knees met her chest. Outside, Dr. Olinger beckoned for Wes and Annette to step down the hallway where Jennifer couldn't hear. You'll have to help me with Heidi. If there's pain or discomfort in her pelvic region, I should perform an internal examination. It's not uncommon for young girls to be sensitive about a gynecological examination, especially at her age, but Heidi's violent reaction is unusual. If you wish, I'll go no further. It's up to you. But it would be in the best interest of your daughter to proceed. If that's the way you feel, Dr. Olinger, I'll do what I can, Annette answered. I've never seen Heidi like this, so I'm not sure what will happen. Annette and Dr. Olinger returned to the examination room. Wes stayed outside. He listened carefully and could hear the sounds of scuffling and muffled cries from Jennifer. Then everything grew quiet. Wes waited as the minutes multiplied. He paced the corridor until finally the door opened and Annette walked out. Her face was ashen. Dr. Olinger followed her. I'm sorry, the doctor said. I'll let you and your husband talk about it. After you decide what course of action to follow, I'll meet you in my office. Annette watched Dr. Olinger walk away. She seemed immobilized. Wes expected her to turn around and walk toward him. She didn't. The echo of Dr. Olinger's footsteps grew faint as he proceeded down the long hallway. Finally, Wes stepped behind Annette and gently placed his hands on her arms. Annette stiffened and slowly turned. A cross she wore around her neck held tightly in her right fist. She looked at Wes with tear-filled eyes and collapsed against his chest, sobbing. Holding her tightly, Wes let her cry out her pain and fear. Eventually, Annette stifled her sobbing and blew her nose in Wes's handkerchief. Wes, Annette said, looking at him, Jennifer's got... Annette broke down again. Her chest heaving. From deep within she drew the strength to tell Wes, Jennifer has gonorrhea. A muffled groan rose from deep within Annette's throat. This is all a bad dream, isn't it? She cried. No one could be so evil. No one could do that. Could they? I'm Michelle Milthorpe, said a nurse whose silver-streaked dark blonde hair was pulled back and covered at the ends by a nurse's cap. Dr. Olinger asked me to keep an eye on your daughter while you talk with him, she added, smiling kindly. Thank you, Annette said. We'll speak with Dr. Olinger in a moment. Take your time, Nurse Milthorpe said. We'll have a nice visit. I'll take her to a more comfortable waiting room just around the corner. Come on, Wes said. We can't put off talking to Dr. Olinger forever. Dr. Olinger rested his elbows on the chrome arms and folded his hands together, with his braced index fingers pointed upward. Annette and Wes waited for him to speak. I know this isn't going to be easy. I wish I could blunt the seriousness of the situation, but I can't. Please understand that several laws govern how I approach this predicament. Wes narrowed his eyes and looked intently at Dr. Olinger. What do you mean? Medical ethics and the law mandate that any time a sexually transmitted infection is found in a pre-pubertal child, it must be considered evidence of sexual abuse until proven otherwise. Non-sexual transmission of sexually transmitted pathogens is extremely rare in children. Our hospital also has policies requiring a psychological examination of the victim, in addition to whatever medical treatment is needed. Dr. Olinger tilted back in his chair, unfolded his hands, and gestured with his open palms toward them to ease the tension. I had our lab run a fast analysis, and it confirms what I suspected, the presence of gonorrhea. But generally, if there's one sexually transmitted disease, others coexist. We must do a full battery of tests. I'm also concerned about physical abuse. The emotional impact of Dr. Olinger's words fell like hammer blows. Wes and Annette sat dejectedly, as if the doctor were a judge pronouncing a horrible penalty. Dr. Olinger peered from underneath his eyebrows and set his gaze on Wes. The most pointed question I have to ask is for you, the child's father. You can lie to me, but you'll endanger Heidi's life if you do. Have you sexually abused your child? Wes had acted behind the microphone many times. With a tinge of shock and a full measure of disgust, he stared at Dr. Olinger and said, I understand why you have to ask that question. The answer is no. Without hesitation, Dr. Olinger replied, Do you have any idea who might have molested Heidi? I have no idea, Wes said, shaking his head. Neither do I, Annette added through silent tears. The tests and surgery are expensive, Dr. Olinger pointed out. Do you have insurance? No, Wes responded. We do have a public assistance credit program you can apply for. The nurse can tell you all about it if you like. Thank you, Annette said. I'm sure it will be helpful. She paused for a moment, then looked straight into the doctor's eyes. What does all of this mean? How serious is a sexual disease in a child Heidi's age? It depends on the response of her immune system, which determines how quickly she will respond to treatment. Dr. Olinger arose and stepped around the side of his desk, looking at Wes empathetically. Then he moved to the door and opened it for them. I hope you decide quickly about further treatment. If Heidi suddenly complains of extreme pain, please bring her to the emergency room immediately and ask for me. I'm sorry I can't stay with you any longer. If you'll excuse me. Wes and Annette thanked the doctor for his help and stepped into the hallway. Well, that settles one thing. I have to go back to Clarion, Wes said. Annette looked stunned. She hadn't anticipated Wes's leaving, certainly not at this time. I know there's no worse time for me to leave, but if Jennifer needs intensive medical treatment, I've got to make some money. Going back to talk about town is the quickest way to do it, if the boss will let me have my job back. It's not safe back there. I won't let you do it. Jennifer needs you. I need you, Annette said, eyes brimming with tears. A lump came to his throat as he realized Annette meant what she said. Wes and Annette walked in silence to the room where earlier they had seen Nurse Milthorpe take Jennifer. As they eased the door open, they saw Jennifer and the nurse seated on an old sofa with numerous colored pictures lying between them. Have you been drawing some pictures for Mommy? Annette asked. Yes. Nurse Milthorpe gave me some paper and crayons and asked me to draw whatever I liked. This one's for you, Mommy, she said, handing Annette what appeared to be clouds floating over patches of green with creatures resembling cows and horses. Thank you. It's beautiful. I'll treasure it forever, Annette said, folding the picture and placing it in her purse. She turned to the nurse. It's very thoughtful of you to spend such special time with Heidi. Nurse Milthorpe blushed and accepted the compliment. It's your daughter who's special. What's this? Wes inquired, motioning to another stack of pictures Jennifer had drawn. Nothing, Jennifer replied. Just some drawings of things I think about a lot. Nurse Milthorpe asked me to draw whatever was in my head. Wes picked up the sketches and held them where Annette could see as he thumbed through them. They depicted strange scenes of stick figures arranged in triangular patterns. Other scenes portrayed what appeared to be red blood and tears mixed with mountains and trees he recognized as the mounds of the elders. He fingered the curled edges of the paper and noticed that Jennifer had drawn so hard and furiously in certain places that the paper was torn and deeply etched in color. His eyes unexpectedly misted over, and he quickly wiped away the tears. Taking a deep breath, Wes turned to Annette. Tell Heidi about the visits we're arranging for her and Nurse Milthorpe. Annette nodded and looked at her daughter. Dr. Olinger wants to start helping your tummy ache as soon as we can. Jennifer hesitated, then glanced out of the corner of her eye at Nurse Milthorpe. Will I be with her all the time?" Annette looked at Nurse Milthorpe. "Will that be possible?" "By all means. I work exclusively for Dr. Ben." Wes reached down and took Jennifer's hand in his and smiled at Nurse Milthorpe. "Thank you again. You've obviously made a big impact on Heidi. We'll look forward to seeing you again." The nurse smiled back at Wes and walked to the door, watching as the unlikely trio faded down the corridor. The car pulled to the curb. The chilly Chicago air pierced their clothes, biting sharply. Annette only had Hannah's thin cotton coat to ward off the chill, and Wes felt bad to see her huddling uncomfortably against the wind coming off Lake Michigan. The next morning, Wes awoke early. He wanted to sneak out before Annette and Jennifer awakened. It would be easier this way. No emotional goodbyes. Wes could still be the hero, go back, get the money, save the day, and maybe he wouldn't have to deal with feelings that seemed more intense than friendship. His thoughts were broken by Annette's voice. "Good morning," she said, as she walked into the kitchen. "I smell the coffee. You weren't going to leave without saying goodbye, were you?" "I was just having a cup of coffee before waking you," Wes answered. Annette walked over and put her arms around his chest, hugging him tightly. "Has anyone ever told you what a warm and kind person you are?" Wes set his coffee cup on the table and awkwardly responded, "Thank you. No one has ever told me that before." At that moment, Wes heard the door open and the sound of shuffling feet coming down the short hallway. It was Jennifer, rubbing her eyes and wobbling from side to side. "Mommy, my tummy hurts. It burned all night." Annette knelt and took Jennifer in her arms. "We'll go see Dr. Ben just as soon as Wes Annette interrupted herself and looked at Wes. He couldn't avoid the situation, so he knelt between them and said, "Jennifer, I have to leave for a while." Jennifer jumped away from him. You can't, she cried. "You're my best friend." Jennifer poked out her lower lip, pouting and summoning what feminine wiles she had at that tender age. Wes took her hand and said, "Jennifer, if you want your tummy to stop hurting, you have to see the doctor, and right now your mommy and I don't have any money to pay for that. I've got to talk on the radio again like I did when you first called me. That's how I earn a living." "But the nasty people will hurt you," Jennifer protested. "They're mad at you. You took me away from my husband." Jennifer didn't realize she had said husband. Even after she did, the shock on Wes's and Annette's faces didn't register with her. Stunned silent, Wes's mind raced. Husband? He didn't have any time, nor would it have been appropriate now to ask about it. "I'll never be far away from you, Jennifer. If you need me, I'll be here in a matter of hours. Remember, I promised." Wes arose, put on his coat, and walked to the door. Annette came to him and reached up to kiss him gently on the cheek, whispering, "I'll find out what she meant by the word husband. Don't worry about it. Please be careful. I'm praying for you." 20 minutes later, he was heading south on the freeway. The Chicago skyline diminished in the distance until all he could see in the rearview mirror was the tip of the Sears Tower, piercing the low haze of an icy early November morning. Eventually, that too faded from sight. When at last the outskirts of Clarion came into view, the muscle in Wes's jaw constricted, and he clutched the steering wheel with both hands, as if he wanted to assure his control over the car's direction. Wes flipped on the radio and turned to WTTK in time for the 11 o'clock news. As the last report of the hourly headlines concluded, an announcer declared, "From now until noon, your favorites of yesterday on the late morning community calendar. Songs of the 40s and news of the 90s right here in Clarion. If you have an announcement to make about a community gathering, a job or service that's available, call WTTK. Don't forget, at noon, talk about town with your host, Chuck Bailey." "Bailey?" Wes questioned out loud. At least he didn't have to wonder what happened to his show. 15 minutes later, Wes entered his apartment. The sink was full of dirty dishes, magazines and newspapers were strewn throughout the living room, and a cup of once-stale coffee sat on the kitchen table, the liquid evaporated and dark sediment ringing the bottom. Wes grabbed the phone and dialed WTTK. "Can I speak to Chuck Bailey, please?" "He's unavailable right now. Getting ready for Talk About Town. You can leave a message. May I ask who's calling?" "Wes Bryant." There was silence at the other end of the line. Brenda, WTTK's receptionist, had been struck mute. She regained her senses and said, "Just a moment." Wes heard the familiar voice of his faithful producer. "Wes, where in the world have you been?" "It doesn't matter," Wes answered. "Do I still have a job?" Sure. I told Warren you had to take care of some important personal business. He didn't like it, but went along with it. I've been doing the show, but I gotta tell you, buddy, I'm no Wes Bryant. I underestimated what it takes to get in front of that microphone every day, no matter how you feel." "Thanks. Can I do the show today?" "I suppose. I was going to talk about the city council proposal to develop that park on the east end of town. You want to do that? Can you get here in time?" "No sweat. But I don't want to talk about the park. My return appearance has got to be stronger than that." "What about discussing Sheriff Arnold Hancock's plan to establish sobriety checkpoints during the upcoming Thanksgiving Day weekend? Ever since Reverend Carmichael was killed by that hit-and-run driver, Hancock has been saying he'd still be alive if the sheriff's department had the authority to stop cars when alcohol use is suspected." Hancock. Wes's blood boiled at the sound of the name. It didn't matter to Wes if discretion was the better part of valor. He'd take action today. "That's a great idea. Let's go with the Hancock thing, but under one condition. You get Sheriff Hancock into the studio to face me, eyeball to eyeball." Bailey picked up on the resolution in Wes's voice. "Where's the win?" he asked. "You know the rule on talk radio. Always have an antagonist. The whole town is angry over Carmichael's death. Almost nobody opposes the sobriety checkpoints. Anyway, Wes, it sounds like you've got a hidden agenda of some kind, wanting a head-to-head with Hancock." Wes summoned his innate acting abilities. "No agenda, Chuck. I just think the show would have more punch if Hancock were there. After all, it's his idea, so he should defend it." "Okay. We've got less than half an hour now. You're going to have to do the topic cold." "I can handle it," Wes said. Suddenly, a thought flashed through Wes's mind. In any other context, it would have been simply a mischievous idea. In this case, he had deliberate design. "See if you can get that young lawyer, Manly Harris, on the show with Hancock. Might make some sparks fly." "Wes, you're not going to stir up that racial stuff, are you? You need to have a real win on your first day back, not a dogfight about old animosities." Wes couldn't explain his true intentions, and he had little time to get his point across. "I'm in a hurry, Chuck. Got to take a shower. One more thing. Don't tell Hancock I'm going to be there. I'd like this to be a surprise." "You are up to something, aren't you?" "All right. I'll go along with your ornery game. It's just good to have you back." Wes changed to a fresh, unwrinkled shirt, a rarity in the Bryant wardrobe, quickly brushed his hair, and put on a tie. The tie was for Hancock, a little something to make himself look more serious and professional. He wasn't going to work. He was going to war. Quietly slipped into the back door of WTTK without anyone seeing him and went to his office. He buzzed Bailey on the intercom, and moments later the Talk About Town producer rushed through the door and uncharacteristically threw his arms around Wes in a bear hug. He patted Wes roughly in the back in macho exuberance, declaring, "Boy, am I glad to see you. Hancock and Harris are sitting in that studio glaring at each other like World War III is about to start. Nobody's saying anything. Let's get down there before something happens." "No, Chuck. Don't tell them I'm here. Let them think you're doing the show until the last minute, that I'm going to pop in the door." Chuck's exuberant expression turned somber. He cocked his head and looked at Wes from the corner of his eye. "Tell me what you're up to, old buddy. Remember, I covered for you while you were gone. My job's at stake, too, you know." Wes looked back with a seriousness Bailey had never seen before. "Chuck, you have no idea what's at stake in that studio. Your job and mine are the least important things at risk today. Wes took a deep breath, pulled his shoulders back, and tightened his belt a notch. He looked at his reflection in the window and straightened his tie. Sheriff Hancock's back was to the door. Manley Harris sat on the other side of the table facing the door. When he saw Wes, his face lit up with a huge grin. "Bryant! Wes Bryant!" Harris rose to his feet, genuinely delighted. Sheriff Hancock stayed seated. Slowly, he turned in his chair, leaning his elbow on the table and looking back over his shoulder. He stared up at Wes with a dark look in his penetrating blue-black eyes. He too grinned, but his lips barely parted. "Mr. Bryant," said Hancock, "I understand you've been out of town on personal business. Welcome back to Columbus County." "It's 2 minutes to airtime, and Columbus County is waiting," Wes said, directing Harris and Hancock to take the positions he designated at the table. 7 minutes later, the opening jingle, initial spot breaks, and introductory patter were out of the way. Wes said nothing about his absence or return. He acted as if he'd never left the show, and this was just another day. Then, Wes wheeled his chair around and looked squarely at Sheriff Hancock. "Our special guest today, Arnold Hancock, Sheriff of Columbus County for 31 years. Welcome, Sheriff Hancock, to talk about town." Then Hancock responded with equal mockery. "Thanks, Mr. Bryant. I welcome the chance to publicly set the record straight on some issues that concern all the citizens of our county." And next to Sheriff Hancock, a brilliant lawyer known to many of you as a champion of the underdog, Mr. Manley Harris. "Thank you, Mr. Bryant," Harris responded. "I've long admired your blunt style of dealing with topics a lot of folks in Clarion ignore. Like today, a serious issue about civil rights and First Amendment liberties." Wes reacted to Harris's setup by assuming an offensive posture toward him. "Mr. Harris, what's wrong with cracking down on drunk driving to make Columbus County a safer place for all of us? A close friend of yours, the Reverend James Carmichael, apparently was run down by a drunk driver." Before Harris could answer, Sheriff Hancock attacked. "The issue is safety, Mr. Bryant. Safety on the highways. Safety for all our citizens." Wes gritted his teeth at Hancock's mention of the safety of Columbus County citizens. "Sheriff Hancock, are we sure that Harris isn't concerned about public safety?" Wes shot back. "If someone deliberately drives drunk and endangers the lives of others, he should be ordered off the streets. No thinking person would argue with that, and I assume that an attorney has a fair amount of intelligence." Manley Harris joined the offensive. "Mr. Bryant is right. I'm not opposed to properly conducted sobriety checks, but that's not what you and your deputies have done in the past." "Nobody complains when they go through a security check to board an airplane. They don't say that's unconstitutional. Besides, no matter how many drunks we catch, it's the deterrent effect we're after," Sheriff Hancock said. "When you tried this same tactic last year, the number of black people stopped at roadblocks was twice that of white people. And in Columbus County, less than 20% of the people are black. Smell an attempt to intimidate black people, Sheriff? Maybe you don't, but I do." Harris glared at Hancock. Wes glanced toward Bailey. His producer could hardly contain his excitement. This was talk radio at its best. Bailey cupped his fingers in the vague outline of a C for commercial. Wes quickly called a halt to the debate. "We've got to break for our sponsors, then I'll be right back. You're listening to Talk About Town. I'm your host, Wes Bryant." He stood, took the pitcher of water always sitting at his right, and leaned over the counter between him and the table where Harris and Hancock sat. He conspicuously poured Harris a glass of water and set the pitcher back down, ignoring Hancock. Before he could gloat, a banging at the studio window got his attention. Bailey appeared to be in a heated conversation with Warren Cruz, who normally paid little attention to Wes's show. The station owner checked the ratings, kept track of the amount of spot time sold, and made sure Talk About Town was turning a profit. Beyond that, he pretty much let Bailey and Bryant have their way. But now he was obviously upset. Cruz motioned for Wes to come to the other room. Wes excused himself, stepping out of the studio, and hurried into Studio C. "What's going on, Bryant?" Cruz wanted to know. "First you disappear without notice. Then you show up at the spur of the moment, and now this. WTTK's got a good reputation in this city. We've always gotten along well with civic officials, including the sheriff's department. Then you bring in this smart-aleck lawyer who's probably a card-carrying member of the ACLU and embarrass Arnold Hancock, an institution in this town. Hancock's record of law and order is unblemished, and he's never lost an election. Why are you holding him up to this kind of ridicule? Look, boss, no matter who Sheriff Hancock is or what the community thinks of him, Harris has raised some valid points. The Federal Communications Commission gives you a responsibility to serve all your listeners, black and white, the poor and the powerful. And if Hancock's sobriety tests are discriminatory, someone needs to say it. If you want to take me behind the woodshed after the show, so be it. But right now, I've got to do my best job to get the truth out. Cruz glanced at the clock on the wall. He fidgeted with some papers in his hands, rubbed his chin, and shook his head in exasperation as if reconciling an inner debate. 30 seconds, Bailey interrupted. Wes saw a frightened look come into Cruz's eyes. He shoved the fistful of papers toward Wes. Don't push it, Bryant. Hancock has a lot of friends in this county, and they could lean on me and make my life real uncomfortable. Wes turned to walk away. He opened the door to Bailey's studio and glanced back at Cruz, who stood there slapping the tightly rolled papers against his thigh. Wes threw open the door to the studio, leaped 3 big steps to his chair, and switched on the microphone. This is Wes Bryant, back with you again and talk about town. My guests today, Attorney Manley Harris and Sheriff Arnold Hancock. We'll take calls in a moment, but first I want my guests to wrap up any final comments. Sheriff Hancock, you first. Methodically, Hancock reached up to the brim of his gray Stetson and tipped it back. The elbow of his other arm rested on the table. He pointed his index finger at Manley Harris like a schoolteacher lecturing an obstinate student. Harris, let's get one thing straight. I run a clean county. It's a free country. But if anyone's going to drink and drive afterward, they'd better sober up before heading back to Columbus County. That means black and white. No criminal coddler, this sheriff. He was part Matt Dillon, part General Patton. There was a momentary silence as Harris slowly put on his unassuming wire-rimmed glasses. He reached into his briefcase by the side of the table, pulled out some papers, and laid them in front of his microphone. He shuffled through them left to right as if dealing cards, until he found one with several highlighted paragraphs. He took it in both hands, glanced at it, then with all the high drama of a courtroom lawyer orchestrating a jury's response, Manley Harris took off his glasses, one wire hook at a time, and calmly looked at Sheriff Hancock. The Reverend James Carmichael was my best friend, Harris said quietly and firmly. He was not only my pastor, a man of God, and a great leader, Harris said. He was like a father to me. He was the only father I ever knew. Sheriff Hancock, the Reverend James Carmichael was the most important person on the face of this earth to me outside of my mother. This, Manley Harris said, holding the highlighted document in his hands, is a copy of the coroner's report concerning the death of James Carmichael. Harris shook the papers in Sheriff Hancock's face. I'm sure you've read it, haven't you? He said, cocking his head. Sure I've read it, Hancock shot back. So what? It's not what the coroner's report says, Harris responded. It's what it doesn't say. Harris sorted through papers on the table and pulled out another sheet. This is a police report on the accident, signed by you. Cause of death? Hit and run. Is this your signature, Sheriff Hancock? Did you file this report? Hancock squirmed. He pulled out a large white handkerchief and folded it, and using it like a dish rag, wiped the sweat from his face. Yeah, I filed that report. I did some rounds myself that night, checking on reports about vandalism in that part of town. I found Carmichael. Whoever hit him was driving like a maniac. He was mangled beyond belief. Did you call an ambulance to attempt to resuscitate him? No, why should I? He was dead. Is it your prerogative as a police officer to make that determination? He was dead, I tell you. I don't want to describe what he looked like in front of this radio audience. I'm not asking what the body looked like. I just want to know whether you had the authority to pronounce him dead and why you didn't call an ambulance. You're an officer of the law. You didn't even have to go to a phone. All you had to do was pick up the radio mic in your police vehicle. You could have had an ambulance there in minutes. Why didn't you? I did what anyone would have done. No, you didn't do what anyone would have done. Anyone else would have had to call an ambulance, and a doctor or medic would have had to examine him. If there was no doctor in the scene, he would have had to have been taken to a hospital and pronounced dead on arrival. Was he? I don't remember. Harris leaned back in his seat and loosened his tie. He shook his head. You don't remember? And you're the sheriff of this county? You found a body by the roadside, and you don't remember what you did? Well, let me refresh your memory, Harris said, as if Sheriff Hancock was standing trial before the entire county. According to this report, you had James Carmichael's body taken directly to the coroner's office. Nobody saw the body but you and the coroner. No doctor, no medic, no other police officer. Since when do you have the right to take that kind of unilateral action? Sheriff Hancock leaned forward over the table and twisted both his hands back and forth around the mic stand, as if its slender steel cylinder was Harris's throat. Young man, I've been sheriff of this county nearly as long as you've been alive, and no one has ever questioned my integrity. No one has ever questioned my handling of the law. No one has ever dared make the kind of accusations you're making. Accusations? I didn't make any accusations, Sheriff Hancock. I merely asked how you handled a routine police investigation after discovering a body. Callers, I'll be back with you in a moment, West broke in. Hang on. First, back to Harris and Hancock for a final comment. Sheriff Hancock? I've got nothing to say. I came here to talk about what really matters. Safe streets, good police protection, keeping drugs out of town, and looking after the proud citizens of Columbus County. Manley Harris, anything else before we go to the calls? One more thing, Mr. Bryant, Harris responded. I have in my hands a petition to the State Attorney General signed by Hannah Carmichael, the Reverend James Carmichael's widow, asking that Carmichael's body be exhumed for an official autopsy. When I leave today, this petition will be filed in Columbus County District Court. If Sheriff Hancock was disturbed about exhuming Reverend James Carmichael's body, he concealed it well. Mr. Bryant, I have some important matters to take care of. You'll excuse me? Wes interrupted quickly. I thought you were going to stay for the entire show. That was our agreement. Sheriff Hancock's eyes narrowed to slits. His bushy eyebrows tipped upward as he coldly looked at Wes and blustered, Well, things change, don't they? You'll just have to do without me.
This concludes this side. Please fast forward the cassette to the end and turn the tape over for the continuation of the program.